Welcome back to Road Gang Radio. Join Jimmy Mack and Lindsay Lawler's Gang of the Airwaves by subscribing to Radio Nemo on YouTube.
We celebrate all kinds.
Make it official. After all, if you're listening, you're already in the gang. The Road Gang.
Hey, Kevin Lindsey, good morning to you. How you doing, man?
Oh, pretty good. How you doing, Chris?
Well, I mean, you know, it's like I tell people, trucking's a rough racket, man. Guy Fieri decides not to use, decides to kind of do I think he did an in-house thing and didn't get a third-party logistics provider, and instead they just brokered somebody out to do it. Bye. Why wouldn't Guy Fieri's people, I'd have fired everybody. Why wouldn't you sit down with an actual 3PL and be like, hey, so let me get your bona fides, tell us about yourself, who recommends you, what other celebrities use you guys, how do you do this stuff? No, they just kind of, how did they get brokered out to a Eastern European bunch of gangsters? You don't have to answer that, by the way. That's not your job. That's not your job.
Good,
yeah.
good.
How was your weekend, man?
It was pretty good. It was pretty good. Had a good weekend. Actually, took Friday off and drove over to the great state of Mississippi and had a little small family reunion get together and celebrated my mom's 90th birthday.
Oh, congratulations on that, by the way. Here's hoping that I got 7 years to wait on that from either one of my parents, so I'm going to keep my fingers crossed and hope I can have the same sort of celebration. And I'm taking it, if you're celebrating a 9-0, that mom's still all there, correct? Am I guessing correct? Kind of, sort of?
Yeah, but nobody wants to ride with her to church anymore. She still drives to church occasionally.
Oh, my God. I had an uncle that lived to 99. He was still driving across the causeway at 94, and the only way he would finally accept not being allowed to drive across the causeway is if his nephew drove across the causeway to get him, and then they drove back in his car. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Kevin Lindsey, who is the manager of...
Old folks doing stuff, right?
Old folks doing stuff. You know what? I've been doing it this way all my life. Why should anything change? By the way, that is kind of the foundational thought process behind Maintenance Matters. The manager of technical service, Kevin Lindsey, joins us, TravelCenters of America. It's always good to have you. And I think you sum it up best by saying it's that time of year, isn't it? It is time to have this conversation. Seasonal maintenance.
It always seems like it's that time of year, doesn't it? But it kind of is, though, because seasons are always changing. I live in Tennessee, and they always say if you don't like the weather today, wait till tomorrow. So,
yeah, exactly.
And it's true.
You know what the joke in New Orleans is?
You have to wait a few hours.
Yeah, you know what the joke in New Orleans is? If you don't like the weather, cross the street.
Across the street, right?
This is a really dumb question, but I'm going to ask it by way of making a point. 4 seasons, and even if your area of the world doesn't have 4 seasons, like New Orleans literally has what I call summer and a blur of everything else, it really is. If you actually did a maintenance update 4 times a year, you would be good to go for a very long time, correct?
I don't see why not, right?
Yeah.
Of course, it's going to depend on how deep of a maintenance you do 4 times a year, but that's a good
time to check
target,
in,
right?
Yeah, good time to check in. Good
is,
target. Good target.
Regardless, right?
All right.
Yeah.
So we're rolling towards winter. That's where we're headed. Okay, we're kind of going into the fall, coming through the fall, going towards winter. These 2 areas here. So where should we just begin? I mean, where should we kind of dig into, like making sure that we've come through the summer, we talked about that, we got ourselves to the end of it, made sure that we didn't blow our AC out and all the other kind of groovy stuff that happens at the end of the summer. Where do we go from here?
Exactly, right. Well, I would personally, I always like to start with brakes because, because obviously the truck's still running, engine's running, drivetrain's doing good because you're still going down the road and hauling freight, right? So you still won't need to stop when you need to, though. So hopefully brakes are okay because, I think it wasn't very long ago, just a month and a half, 2 months ago, we had brake week. So hopefully you kind of look things over before that week. But, it's a good time to actually, dig a little deeper into things, is there certain things been done to the truck recently? Over the summer, you may have had an issue. Stop and think about okay, well, I had this problem, oh, that's right, they bypassed my air dryer. You getting into, I mean, I know New Orleans, it's always wet season, so in here, as it is mostly across the South, but to an extent, but, we're getting into that time of year, so, it's a good idea to make sure that air dryer, has been, hasn't been bypassed, and if everything's working properly. When's the last time I changed my filter in my air dryer, things like that. Have I noticed any changes, in the way my dryer purges, when my air pressure builds back up and I hear my, that air exhaust out of my air dryer, out of that purge valve, you hear that, right? Am I hearing that more often? Those types of things, something, I don't know, it's really hard to say, well, do this. I mean, you can, because obviously, all the OEMs have specific intervals for checking specific items. And, most of the stuff that I always talk about in any seasonal maintenance, though, are really, most of these things are technically should be done on a daily or weekly basis, at minimum anyway. So, hopefully if you do that properly and really pay attention to what's going on and anything you've noticed that it's changed, so.
Yeah, and by the way, there's a famous term they have when people want to kind of get their company straight, want to kind of get a better sense of politicians, get a better sense of their constituencies. If people have, and by the way, it's National Forgiveness Day, and one of the things they tell you about forgiveness is that it's better to go to people you've wronged and listen to them rather than talking to them. I mean, basically, what we're suggesting here to some degree is a listening session. Is to take the time to kind of move around the truck and to move around the brakes and give them a good listen. You're listening for stuff. I mean, that's basically what it is. And you kind of want to know if you're hearing the right things. Sometimes you don't want to hear anything at all. And if you hear something, you're like, that's a problem. That's where the issues are. There's the things I don't want to hear, or not hearing the things you're supposed to hear on the flip side of that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a great way of putting it, because it truly is. Because, nobody knows that truck better than you, or as a driver, or, or the person been operating that truck, the last, however many miles, however long you've been in that particular truck. So you kind of grow to know that the little nuances, the little noises, the little sounds that you hear. Well, when I'm on this particular stretch of highway, in Ohio or wherever, I always hear this same noise, so it must be something to do with the road. And it very well could be, but I think we all, the more you travel down the same roads over and over, you get used to hearing certain sounds from the area that you're in, whether it's the road or whether it's coming from something else. It's when you start hearing those anomalies, that, wait a minute, what was that? What was that? What could have caused that? And that's where you really need to, as you do those daily inspections and stuff, and especially for a seasonal type inspection, take a much harder look at everything. Does this look like it's going to make it through, the next few months and think about the changes that you could see in the environment. Maybe I know for the next 3 months I'm hauling this certain load to this certain location and back and things like that. So stop and think about that. All right, I'm going to be going, to Wisconsin and back for the next 3 months. I'm hearing this strange noise here. That could mean I've got something going on with my air system. I better make sure that I've got all my air tanks drained, everything's working properly. I need to make sure I've got some airline antifreeze with me, because within the next 3 months, headed up north, you're gonna need it, most likely, right?
I
things
was
like that.
I was okay. So let's kind of, and it's really fun. I'm gonna go once again. Let's go to left field for a second here. So Dave and Cheryl, they have Subarus, and while I'm in town setting the studio up, getting kind of things in order, hopefully being able to get back to California at some point in my life. Um, I've been using the other one, the older model. Before they actually bought their new one, there was a strange sound that was being produced. For the first couple of weeks of it, Kevin, we thought this is the absolute truth, and we know cars pretty good. We thought that the alignment was off, and we were just slowly drifting towards the side of the road and hitting the side of the, the rumble you get.
Rumble strips.
Yeah, the rumble
Yeah.
strip. Okay. It wasn't a rumble strip, as a matter of, we'd always would adjust our steering and it would be fine. We thought, okay, we got to get the alignment looked at. The alignment was fine. It was the transmission fluid, dude. It was the transmission fluid between second and third. And literally, because of that transmission fluid leak, what was going on was every time it would go between second and third, it would get this rumble inside of it before actually clearing up and then being fine and then kind of moving forward. And so, the thing that really kind of threw us was the fact that we're driving on Louisiana roads. And there are so many
Yeah, yeah.
the thunk. Brr. I mean, it's so many places where you would do that anyway, and that's why it's so important to take the time and really, really listen. Sorry, I wanted to kind of give an example of what we're talking about here.
No,
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely,
you know,
absolutely.
you know.
Yeah.
So let's talk about air leaks in regards to brake systems, by the way, and why we should check. Let's talk about hearing for the air leaks. But what I really want to talk about is what a sluggish valve means in the long term. And like I said, there are plenty of people who know exactly what we're talking about. But just for those people who are just kind of getting new to the thing, and let's kind of tell them about what a sluggish valve now could turn into.
Well, most of your air valves, on air brake vehicles and stuff, where you really notice like a sluggishness is typically when you depress the brakes and then release them. It's like there's a delay sometimes, and that's kind of what I mean by something being sluggish. So, but really what that is that's an exhaust in those valves, and inside of those air valves, most every air valve, every air valve in an air brake system on a truck is going to have some type of exhaust that I kind of use the phrase that's normally open to the atmosphere, meaning that if the valve is not actuated, then the exhaust is just open to the atmosphere, which that also means that with the truck just sitting there, that valve not being used, brakes aren't being depressed or something. That means we just went through the summer and everything, right? Well, insects, bugs, debris things could have built up inside that exhaust part of that valve, and all of a sudden it slows down the airflow being released when that valve is actuated and it goes to exhaust. So when you run into stuff like that, you hear those little odd things. Well, what in the world caused that? And what was that? and that's why I was kind of aiming towards that whole listening type of diagnosis for diving deeper into some of this, because when that happens, you want to really try to dive in, or have someone really dive in and look at those things. You notice anything, and that's when you've also got to stop and go back. Okay, did I have any work done anywhere on this part of the system or something? Maybe you going down the road had run over something and busted an airline or something, and had a roadside service come out and replace it. When you've got those types of things that have happened in the past, did they splice a line? They told me they spliced that, and I needed to go ahead and replace it. Did I ever do that? No, I better get that done, right? So things like that, right? You kind of got to go back and remember what you've had done, because, you're working hard delivering freight. A lot of times we get things done, and you got to get back on the road and got to go. And temporary fixes, when they turn into long-term fixes, they turn into problems. that's just the way that works.
Well, and the other thing is too is the fact that remember, and it's also important when somebody does something for your truck is to remember what they told you for the aftercare and the after instructions. The idea,
Yeah.
look, I'm going to get you to the next checkpoint. You're going to be fine. You'll get the delivery done. You should be good for a week. Promise me before month's end you'll take care of it. Listen to those people and take care of it. That's really what it kind of comes down to. That's a really great point. There's a lot of people who will work with you, including Kevin Lindsey of Travel Centers of America, who understand that you've got to get the job done, and getting off the road soon isn't always an option. But to be able to say to somebody, look, you're going to get a 34 really soon, or this job will come to an end. You got to get your tuchus into the shop and get this taken care of for reals. Right now, you're okay. It's basically, basically, it's the trucking equivalent of running on a donut for 6 months. It's just, go ahead.
Yeah, and I was going to throw in there as well, because when you do have, something, that happens, whether it was a breakdown or whatever, and especially, if you have a roadside repair, temporary repair done somewhere, if it was on the air brake system, or really anywhere in the air system, but on the air brake system, always ask the question, of the person that did the repair. Hey, did you have to replace any fittings or anything like that? Because you got to remember, these air brake vehicles, the fittings that were designed and engineered into that truck should only be replaced with the like fittings. Now, what I mean by that is, and this is something a lot of people don't think about, but in an air brake system, because the airlines are sitting there empty, just void of anything. There's no pressure in them, right? When you've depressed a brake pedal, you have air that has to rush through these lines, fill up the lines, go all the way back to a relay valve that actually opens another valve and allows air pressure directly from the tanks through bigger lines and more volume to go out to the brake chambers to stop the truck. Well, when you go through that process, there's a timing issue, right? From the time, as a driver, you hit the brake pedal to the time those brakes apply, and there's laws around this timing. But if some of those airlines had to be replaced, and the fittings, to hold those airlines like onto the brake chambers, or from a relay valve to a brake chamber or something, and somebody had to replace a fitting, the difference in fittings is if it's a straight fitting, air goes straight through it. If it's a 45-degree fitting, timing wise, that's like adding about 3 feet of airline. So now it takes it longer to travel that distance and make that bend at that 45. When you put a 90-degree fitting in place of a straight fitting, you're adding almost like 7 feet of airline as far as timing goes. So that's why it's always important. Hey, you had to replace a fitting. Did you put the same fitting back in? Was it a 45? Was it a 90? Was it a straight? Things like that. You want to make sure you've got that stuff right, because what you could notice is all of a sudden you're wearing brakes out quicker on one side than the other, and it could be because they're applying quicker. Or the worst case is, and I've seen this before, where you get into those hard stops and one wheel will actually try to lock up when another one won't. Now, that can happen if you don't have ABS sensors on that axle. But here's the other flip side of that. If you do have ABS sensors, now you're going to have a modulator valve for that side that's actually overworking from what it's designed to do, because it's having, every time the brakes are depressed, it's firing on and off and holding pressure and keeping it from sliding. So by doing that, it's not going to live as long now. So
yeah,
you shortened the life of an ABS valve and didn't realize it, just putting the wrong fitting in. So.
Yeah, and by the way, let me ask you, okay, and I think this kind of got set up earlier, but let me ask you a question. That goes back to the idea that sometimes a temporary fix is a temporary fix, and sometimes people are like, well, look, all I got is this part. I got this part here. We'll get you to the next checkpoint. Please, I am begging you, get that swapped out. Do not keep running on that thing. Is that, we make the joke all the time. What ultimately killed my truck? Well, you turned it on. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all designed to kind of, I mean, and by the way, you can't, as much as people have tried, and some people have really tried, you can't ship of Theseus a semi. You just can't. In case anybody doesn't know what a ship of Theseus is, that's when you leave port with one boat and arrive with another after all the repairs you do because every piece has been changed out. You really can't. It's almost impossible to actually do that. But some people have tried. That's the absolute truth there. And the thing of the matter, and by the way, can you just do me a favor for the sake of sanity? Just define brake balance for people. Like I said, I know most of our listeners know this, and then I have a really funny question for you. But define brake balance for people really at its core and why that's so important.
Well, in reality, brake balance is kind of what I was just describing. It's about the timing from the time the brake pedal is depressed to the time the wheel ends. All actually, let's say it's drum brakes. By the time the shoes actually make contact with the drum, start slowing the vehicle down. But the real key there is not just that, because you want them all basically to apply at the same time from side to side, right, on each axle. But when you're connected, a tractor's connected to a trailer, in reality, when the driver hits the brake pedal, you would think you would really want, air to get to where it's going to stop the vehicle as quick as possible, and you do. But timing wise, and I mean, in fractions of seconds, it really should start for everything to be in good balance, even on each side of the trailer or the truck. But it should start at the rear axle of the trailer, and then the front axle of the trailer, then the rear drive axle of the truck, and the front drive axle of the truck, all the way up to the steering. So the brakes should apply kind of in that order. Now, we're talking, less than a second all the way from the back of a 53-foot trailer to the steering axle. So, there's not a whole lot of a difference there in reality, but good balance, because that's really what it means, because you start slowing it down from the back forward, if that makes sense.
Oh, no, it makes sense. As a matter of fact, even I always tell people, if somebody asked me once about brake balance, I said, do you want to see what happens when you don't have brake balance? I said, watch The Dark Knight Rises. I'm sorry, The Dark Knight. Watch it. Watch the truck flip.
Yeah.
Watch the truck flip, because basically he detaches the back end brake, so when they go airborne, they go airborne. That's how they did the stunt, by the way. I don't know if you've ever seen that. They actually did the stunt with an actual truck, and all they did was cut the brakes in the back. So when the truck driver hit, it was a combination of a cable, and he hit the brakes, and there was no brakes in the back, and it just went airborne. Yeah, so it's important to kind of remember that. And by the way, that's not going to happen. If that happens to you, you're obviously a supervillain in Gotham. But you get the drift. By the way, Kevin, they're having a really terrific conversation on the chat. Just kind of wanted to point this out to you. Our good friends from Truckers Voices asked, what is the worst city to drive in? And I thought I would ask you the question. My answer, by the way, was Atlanta. Not because it's not any worse than a whole lot of other places, but I go there just enough for it to be an inconvenience when I get there, and not enough to actually understand the rhythm of the damn place. Like, I get Memphis, I get Nashville, I get Jackson. I don't know. What about you? Because you travel everywhere.
Honestly, Atlanta's rough, but Atlanta's really more about volume. There's so much volume in Atlanta. I actually had my brother was telling me over the weekend about when he was driving a truck, he got stuck on 285 and had to go around 2 or 3 times before he could finally get off. So, that's a long ways around. He said, I know, I was scared I was going to run out of fuel.
Yeah, I have to tell you. And the other thing is, too, when you make the adjustment, you finally get out of Atlanta, you start headed towards Charlotte. They might as well just call it a speedway, by the way. It's like the great, you go from absolute gridlock to making the jump to light speed, which is really funny. And it's the same experience I have when you leave Nashville, Franklin, and start heading for Chattanooga. You're like, wait a minute. I mean, basically, when did the Millennium Falcon show up here? What is going on?
That I-24 corridor, I live right off of it, and I can vouch for that. From Nashville to Chattanooga, it's like everyone's trying to gain as much speed as they can to jump over Mount Eagle. It's like what are y'all doing?
Yeah, and then here's the thing
It's
that's really
crazy.
here's the craziest thing about it, by the way. And then you add into the mix just enough people who are tourists who can't, especially in the fall as the seasons change, just enough people
Oh
who are
yeah.
driving who are going like, "Ooh, look at the pretty leaves." And I mean,
Mhm.
it can result in some real absolute disasters. I'm surprised that,
I,
go ahead.
no, I was going to say, you were asking me that, and I didn't get to this, but Cincinnati is the one that I usually dread the most going through.
Well, don't you know they're going to change
I don't.
Cincinnati's name? They're going to change its name to Under Construction. They're just going to change its name to
Yeah,
Under
right.
Construction. I mean, just unbelievable. Unbelievable. By the way, Forod says, on my regular route, the worst places from Indianapolis to Ohio state line or vice versa. Forod, I can't say I disagree with you,
Mm.
by the way. My brother, who actually has his CDL and has done a lot of work behind the wheel of a truck, often says, he basically says 75 is a state of mind, is just what he says. I mean, he
So
kind of goes with
yeah.
that. Kevin, we are out of time, brother.
Th-
We got so much more to talk about, but I thought we'd have a little bit of fun there. Some really great folks out there chatting. A lot of people say good morning. Big numbers, by the way. Well done. We will talk at you next week as we always do. Go have the best of weeks.
I will do my best.
Thank
Thank
you.
you guys for having me.
Oh my God, of course. One of the most informative half hours in radio is here on Road Gang Radio. Mr. Kevin Lindsey, you guys know him. You know what he does. You know what he's all about. And we're thrilled to have him all the time. He is, of course, the manager of technical service at TravelCenters of America.